Recording in progress.
Awesome. All right, so we're going to dive in and do a share screen here real quick, and I'm going to pull up the actual workbook that I created for the Real Estate 101 training class. So today, as I mentioned, we're going to go over section 7 and 8, which are, get to it here. It's in my Google Drive. Hey, Phyllis, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. Okay. All right, so we're going to dive in. Anybody who's in coaching, you know that this is in the Google Drive training folder so that you can dive in there and print it or pull it up. I just want to do a quick overall review of the past 6 parts, and then we're going to dive into section 7 and 8 today. So we have our table of contents here, and so we started, I don't know, 8 weeks ago on part 1, which was getting started. So this is really going to be a great guide for you guys in particular who is brand new or new and didn't necessarily know where to get started. So amongst all the things that we provided, onboarding and different kinds of checklists and stuff, I thought it would be a good place because we're putting together a Real Estate 101 class. We want to start from the beginning. So here we talked about just basic market strategies, things to know about the market. I know a lot of people say, oh my gosh, people are starting to ask me, what's the market like? And I don't know what to say. So we did some deep diving in the MLS, looking at what the overall market's looking like right now and what they're predicting it's moving towards. It's always different depending on the time of the year, as well as where you live in the country, because we do have some people that live in different places around the country. So we base that on just my local market here and how many days on the market are average. And we determined, obviously, here in the Canton, Ohio area, we are still in a seller's market. There's still a shortage of listings and things are still selling relatively quick. However, we are starting to see a little bit more market time adding. I want to say it's about a 30-day average right now. So the sellers are freaking out because they thought their house was going to sell in multiple offers in 2 days. So we are starting to weather that storm a little bit. So we talked a bit about those kinds of things. And then we went into really great detail in part 1 about understanding your role in real estate and the transaction process, must-have tools, mindset, getting your goals together, and time blocking. And I'm just going to breeze through these first 6 parts because I want us to get to complete 7 and 8 today. And at the end of each section, we had an assignment. So part 1 came with the assignment of creating a workspace for yourself, whether that be at your office or at home, spending time, learning the MLS, learning dot loop and command, if those are the tools that you're going to be using at your own brokerage. Setting up your voicemail and e-signatures, just really simple things like this that I feel like some people just are like, wow, I never thought to do that. Still have that weird recording on there that says whoever you are trying to call is not available. Updating your headshot or getting a new headshot for business cards and marketing tools. It's really important to keep updated on those things. Photography makes a big difference when we list a house, and it makes a big difference on who you are and how you present yourself to the public. If you're going to be doing a lot of marketing, which most people are, in particular on social media, you want to have that fresh professional headshot ready to go. So spending time on your branding that we were talking about was, what is my brand? Who am I trying to market myself to? Basically, who is my ideal client? And how can I market myself to them? Your brand's so important to also be the same everywhere. So your color scheme, the fonts, whatever it is you're marketing, it should all coordinate. My Instagram should look like my Facebook profile. If I create Facebook, groups, it should look the same because people will start to remember you. Remembering that social media is like your online billboard. Who are you? It's your digital signature out there in the world, and people will start to remember that, like as if they're driving past a billboard every time they see something of yours, if it looks the same, if that makes sense. And then we had some other homework about different things. When we rolled into part 2, we talked about the real estate transaction from A to Z. I do a couple of different trainings, particularly on this topic. A to Z just sounded good to me one night. I don't sleep, so I'm awake in the middle of the night, voice texting myself ideas for classes. So many years ago, I thought, you know what, real estate A to Z, meaning from the beginning to the end, in regards to lead generation, working with buyers and working with sellers. So we talked a little bit about some different things that you can be doing for lead gen. And then what does it look like to have your initial consultations while working with buyers and working with sellers? So we have a total breakdown in here of what that looks like, preparing ahead of time, what you're going to be doing to go and talk to that buyer for the first time, or going to that listing appointment for the first time. So many times, if you want to just dive in, which is great, if you're not prepared, it doesn't matter that they were referred to you by like your parents or something. People still want to work with somebody who came prepared and ready to go. So definitely make sure that you're prepared, in particular for a listing appointment. So we talk about a little bit about, how to set up showings and what that might look like, into what the offer process looks like, and being prepared to know all these details on here ahead of time. We talked a little bit here about contract to close and timelines of offer acceptance and things that go along with that, like the contingency periods and then final walkthrough and then eventually closing day. Things to know what to do for closing day. Even agents I find that are all the way in maybe the second year of their business who didn't have proper training don't really know what that process looks like, or they don't know any better because no one ever told them. And so this is a great refresher for those people too. And then post-closing follow-up. Let me mention, I wish 27 years ago when I got licensed, I had been building a database. I don't even know or remember probably the first 10 years of my business and who I sold houses to. I just know when I'm out there driving around, I'm like, I think I sold that house. Or when I accidentally bump into somebody who I don't remember and they're like, oh my gosh, Gina, you sold us our first house 10 years ago. And I'm like, so starting from scratch right now gives you all a clean slate. And in particular, for some of you who were here for Education Day on Tuesday, you heard Talitha say that she only works with referrals and repeat business. That wouldn't have happened if she wasn't putting together a really good post-close follow-up plan. Super, super important there. And then the assignment from part 2 was to create your buyer and seller marketing packets, role play them with a partner, and shadow your first buyer and seller appointments when possible. Same kind of thing in part 3, but we were talking a little bit more about specific lead generation and client communication, understanding what your database looks like and what's the difference between my SOI and cold leads. I love when people say, well, I don't really want a cold call. Like, how many of you agents have said, I don't want a cold call? My question always is, well, what's actually being defined in your mind as a cold call? Because a cold call is not calling the parents of someone you went to school with. That is not a cold call. You know them. That's very warm. A cold caller is I pick up the white pages and I start with the A's and I just start calling strangers. So there's a big difference, and there's a lot of different scripts to be used for the different kinds of lead gen there. Part 3, follow-up plans, different kinds of 36 touch campaigns. How often should I be calling, emailing, sending messages, pop-bys, things like that. Got a couple different things that we put together and I do specific trainings on. One is called the 5x5, and this is a way of building your database and following up as well, resulting in 300 people in your database in 90 days. That's its own class. The assignment on part 3 was to add 100 people to your database between now and the next training, so 2 weeks, and create weekly lead generation plans and get that time blocked on your schedule. And of course, as always, track what you're doing. Part 4, we talked about scripting, conversations, and how that's going to look. So practicing scripts, what should the conversation look like? How can I, by practicing scripting, make it sound more like a conversation than a script? So I'll just say the more often you practice, the better you'll get at it, and therefore it won't sound like a script. So we go into some details about that kind of follow-up, the different scripts that you can use while working with a buyer. and then different scripts for working with your sellers. The assignment there was to find a scripting partner and role play out your lead gen calls, buyer and seller appointments, report on how it's going in our group chat. Then part 5 and 6, which was last week, was full-blown buyer consultation, step by step. What does that look like? What questions are we asking? What does that marketing packet look like? What are the things that I need to do to prepare my client for the potential of making an offer? So this is a whole great section tailored for you in particular. So you've got a buyer and slash seller coming. So I would definitely dive deep into this buyer consultation section here. And then the steps from showing to closing, broken down here. The documents that you'll need to add to your loop. And then more information about the transaction once you have got it under contract. So basically contract to close. Talking about negotiations with the home inspection and all the other details of a buyer transaction. Assignment was to create a loop, practice writing an offer. Same kind of thing in part 6, but we're flipping over to now the listing appointment. Pre-listing phone call, what does that process look like? Step by step, the things that you need to do to get prepared for that listing appointment we talked about last week. The 4 stages of an appointment. Let me also mention that maybe 5 months ago, I did a training specifically on the 4 stages of a listing appointment. It was recorded. It's in legacygroupguide.com if you want to watch that recording, because I go over great detail of what I'm giving in my marketing packet. Also, what I consider to be the stages of a listing appointment. So that's a recording that I can share with anybody, but it's also for UKW agents here in our resource page. And again, just like the buyer section, we go over details of exactly what the appointment looks like, what they should expect is going to happen during the transaction, all the way through to closing. So that was our negotiating part of sellers. I'm wanting to get to our next section. And then our assignment in part 6 was to prepare a CMA and role play a listing appointment with your partner. So before I dive into what we're here to talk about today, tell me what questions anyone has. I know I went through that really fast. For those of you who know me, I do talk really fast because I've got a lot of information usually to get out. So I'm going to slow down and now we're going to start to pace ourselves through sections 7 and 8. But what questions or thoughts on the first few sections, if any? All right. Well, now we're going to dive in. So part 7 is contracts and negotiations. So I'm going to go ahead over and hop into Dotloop to kind of pull up the contracts. Obviously, every brokerage has totally different contracts, especially if you're in a different state. So bear with us. I'm going to just show you what we have here. But we're going to talk about a few things today. What is the purchase agreement overview? What are the documents that are needed for the transaction? I'm going to show you what we have in our loop as a PC sample for a buyer. I also have one for the listing side as well. Then we're going to dive in and talk a little bit about the important contingencies and timelines on the contract. So, but right now I'm going to flip over to Dotloop. And then we're going to come back here. I'm assuming everybody can see my share screen because no one's mentioned they haven't yet, correct? That has happened before in a class where someone's like, I can't see your share screen, and we didn't know it the whole time. So a thumbs up, everybody can see my screen. Awesome. Okay, I'm going to leave that one sitting there. And then we'll go back there in a minute. All right. So as you log into your Dotloop accounts, sorry for anyone who's not using Dotloop, but it's what we use. We've got our templates, and in here, I created for the whole office something called a PC buyer sample and a PC seller sample or example. And in here are all of the documents that you're going to need, and they're filled out. I want to take some time today to talk about the purchase agreement in particular. So what I did here, and you all have access to at Legacy, is filled out a mock purchase agreement, and I added some side notes just to be able to know what to do. mind you, we're going to do lots of workshops on how to write offers and different things like that throughout the progress of your time in coaching. But there are times and there are agents that I haven't been to one of those, workshops before, or gosh, I just got licensed last week and I already have this buyer and there's no time to wait. I want there to always be a resource for you to dive into. Unless I'm on a cruise ship someplace or in Disney, it's the only two places that I'm not necessarily working, which isn't happening. It's already vacation season's done for me. If you couldn't access me to help you, there's plenty of resources to be able to walk you through, and this is one of them. So my recommendation for everyone in coaching is to print these packets out so that you have them there, so that when you're working through your offer, you've got something as kind of a guide. Then you always add me to your loop and I take a look at it for you. But some of the things that we need to highlight here on the purchase agreement is, of course, preparing your buyer ahead of time. So this doesn't make this process, too hard. Because if in my buyer consultation, I told my buyer, here's what I'm going to need when it comes time to write an offer. I need to know what we're offering. I need to know if you know about earnest money, and let's talk about what that amount might be for your price point. Have you been pre-approved? If so, what are your closing costs? How much money are you putting down? How long do we need for closing? Those are all conversations that we talked about you having way back, I think, in part 3 or 4. As long as you set the proper expectations with your client ahead of time, when it comes time to make the offer, this all won't seem like a big surprise. I know that there's agents that print blank contracts and put them in their marketing packets to be able to give to their clients. I try not to do that because in my experience, high C personalities on the scale of personality test for DISC, they will highlight it all and ask a bajillion questions about things that we don't have answers to until we know what house they're buying. So I don't like that tactic. I just like to point out the things that they should know as we're proceeding to the possibility of making an offer. Makes that time a lot easier. In particular, if we're showing a buyer a house that's just listed on the market and there could potentially be a deadline and multiple offers, we don't want to try to explain these things then. So the more you can do upfront, honestly, the more the client feels like you're working on their behalf anyway. So with our contract, now we added in the commission spot here in this section, so we need to be aware of that. This number should match whatever your buyer's agency agreement is that you had signed. So I put here, this is just one option because we know in the country that commission is all negotiable. Everybody can decide whatever that is for them. I particularly work for 3%, so that's why I use that example, but someone could charge more or less. But that this should most definitely match that buyer's agency agreement. Different things about financing on here that we need to have that conversation with our client. And we'll go over all of this in great detail in our writing offer workshop. So today we're kind of just really touching on it to get you familiar. And really, I wanted you to see that those samples were in there for you, or examples. I keep saying samples. Those examples are there to help walk through that process. Here on line 27 in our contract, it says the seller agrees to pay blank towards buyer's expenses. So that would be like if the buyer were asking for the seller to pay any of their closing costs. So their bank tells them your closing costs are going to be this amount. They maybe have it, they maybe don't, and we're going to put that there. Anybody have any thing they can add? How have you been working through the buyer? I'm curious because I know we've got people on here from different places around the country. How are you guys dealing with the fact that, we're not allowed to put commission on the MLS anymore, which does not mean the seller is prohibited of paying the buyer commission. It just means we can't advertise it on the MLS. Are you guys asking the listing agent at the time that you schedule the showing, is your seller offering a commission, or are you just taking it upon yourself to write it in the purchase agreement? I'm just curious what everybody's working on. Phyllis, I see you have your hand raised. So what are you guys doing there in DC area?
First of all, we had buyer agencies agreements before, so the only thing that's changed is that the commission's not in the MLS. Originally, I was asking sellers or listing agents, are they paying a commission? And then I had someone ask me when I had a listing, and I thought, and here was my response, put it in your offer, and if the numbers work, we'll consider it.
Absolutely.
And so
Yeah.
I have stopped asking, and I've also been teaching my agents, don't ask.
Yeah.
Make sure your buyers understand that we will do everything we can to have the seller pay my commission, although they need to be prepared.
Yeah.
If they say, well, I can't pay your commission, then at the most, I am writing an offer with it in it. Our forms, I'm licensed DC, Maryland, and Virginia, and each jurisdiction has a different way of asking for it. The Virginia contract has a separate line as if we're asking for a seller subsidy. Maryland has a separate document.
Got
So
it.
just depends. And worst case, if the seller says no, then I've wasted time writing a contract, which is no big deal.
Yeah,
But
and
so
we
far
do
since
both.
August, I haven't had a problem on either side of the
Neither.
transaction.
Yeah, same. We have both here at our brokerage. It's not an Ohio thing, it's a brokerage kind of thing. Ohio has allowed the brokerage to decide how they want to have, commission be on the contract or not. So we've decided here at our office that it's on the purchase agreement, but we also have a document called buyer broker compensation agreement, which I'll pull up here in a minute. So it's addressed in both places, so there is no confusion. Nothing worse than someone saying, which I've had in the past, whether it be a buyer or seller, oh, I didn't know I was agreeing to that. And then I have to get snarky and say, let me see, is that your initial on the bottom of page 1 on the purchase agreement? What do you mean you didn't know? Did you initial that page? And then of course they still get mad. So we cover it in both places. So cover it on the purchase agreement and as well on the buyer broker compensation with the total breakdown. But just like you, Phyllis, even from the very beginning, so I've been using buyer's agency agreements since the time I ever got licensed because I don't prefer to work with people that aren't committed to me. That's just how I've always run my business, but I particularly work with sellers. So because of that, it's how I have trickled that into my buyer relationships. If I'm listing a house and I need an agreement signed, it only makes sense when I'm working with a buyer to also have one signed. So I think the ruling in August is actually helping us agents and not hurting us, in my opinion, because now we have to get that document signed prior to showing houses. So just like you, Phyllis, even from the beginning, I am not asking listing agents if they're offering a commission and what is it. I would rather make it part of my contract because then I control the commission that I want to make. If I ask someone and I say, hey, Andy, on that listing of yours over there on Main Street, is your seller offering anything? And if so, what is it? And you tell me it's 2%. Now I feel at a disadvantage because you told me to, I'm charging 3. And then when I send the offer, that agent's going to be like, why'd you put 3? You already know we only said 2. I'd rather not know. Now I can write it in, and for the right offer, they might be willing to pay it. And then we can just negotiate it. And that's where the buyer broker compensation comes in. And it's going to show that breakdown. Sellers paying 2%, buyers paying 1%. I'm still making my 3. So that's how I choose to do that. So it sounds like you're doing something similar. Awesome. Anybody else have anything to add to that as we're moving along in the purchase agreement? All right. Some different things on ours about electronic data security that we've added on here recently. Walkthroughs and fixtures and equipment, who's the title company, all basic stuff on a contract. If it's contingent on the sale of another, I'm sorry, this would be the contingent on a closing of someone's house. Don't misuse this spot. This says the contingency on a closing of the person's house. So for example, Taylor, if your girl lists her house and it's under a contract, then you would write her offer contingent on that deal closing. That is not the same as contingent on her house selling. Totally different contingency document. But in any case, mostly what I'm looking at the purchase agreement and I'm talking to my buyers about is the blanks. All of the other stuff in these paragraphs are pretty standard basic stuff and most likely not to be negotiated. I really go into great detail in explaining to the buyer what they're going to be doing at a general home inspection and what would be happening in the other inspections. Know your area. And I'm not sure of the other states, but here in Stark County, Ohio, and Summit County, Ohio, there are point of sale inspections in certain areas, and there are others that you just have to have within a certain period of time of closing. So by that, I mean, know where you're selling houses, get to know that area, know the requirements, know what inspections might be required. So like here in Ohio, in Cleveland, there are city inspections when you have a transfer of property that are required prior to closing. So don't sell a house up in Cleveland or Cuyahoga County and not know that. That could be a problem later. Home inspections, to my knowledge, are not a requirement anywhere in the state of Ohio, nor by a lender. Don't misunderstand the appraisal from the home inspection. We get this confusion all the time. The appraiser who goes out to look at value is not doing a general home inspection. However, depending on the loan type, FHA, VA, USDA, or even sometimes a conventional loan, the appraiser could flag certain things that they notice are wrong with the house. That's different than a home inspection, however. So when someone says, oh, I'm going FHA, I don't need to do a home inspection because the appraiser is going to inspect, that's okay, but let me be clear on what the appraiser is doing. That's not me trying to talk someone in or out of a home inspection, but also don't think that anyone in the state of Ohio is required to do a general home. They are absolutely not. However, well, septic and some other things could be required. So VA requires a pest inspection. That's the only inspection that's required there unless the property has well and septic. So some counties require point of sale, as I mentioned. So like around us, Summit County is a point of sale county. That means prior to the closing, you have to have had the well and septic done and any repairs made prior to closing. In Stark County, well is not required, however recommended, but your septic is required within 6 months of the transfer of a property. So you don't have to have it point of sale, but you do have to have it within 6 months. Here's my recommendation when it comes to well and septic. If the house has one or both, do those inspections. Recommend that highly to your client because those are way too expensive of repairs or replacement to mess around with. I'd rather see them void their home inspection, which is going to look at other potentially small things. Well and septic is a very big expense to not have someone inspect for that. So that would be my recommendation on that. The other things on here, such as radon, mold, and some of those things, none of that's required. My go-to when I'm negotiating a contract or talking to my buyer is this. We check this box for other here. And what I typically write in here is any other inspections that would be suggested by the home inspector. So in my opinion, there's not necessarily any reason to test for mold unless you saw mold in the house, unless the home inspector gets in the attic and says, hey, there's mold. Now let's go ahead and get a professional mold inspector up here to take a look. Radon we can't see, so that's just a personal preference, whether someone wants to test for it or not. I will say lately in the market, if it's a house that's been on the market 1 day or so, and you can already see because at the showing there's 1 million people there, sometimes the inspections become the thing that gets your offer accepted. And if that's the case, be real crystal clear with your buyer, unless there's required inspections because of the county or well and septic, that they understand that they're agreeing to waiving their home inspection if that's something that they're considering so they get their offer accepted. Too many deals are falling through right now because people get cold feet because they were up against 15 other people and they pulled their home inspection and now they're worried. So have a really good conversation. We've got lots of scripting that we do pretty regularly of how to handle those situations. And then we've just got, other disclosures on here and really our signature page. The most important page of the purchase agreement would really be page 1. So we will do a whole workshop where we're gonna get together here in the next couple of weeks. We're gonna print all these documents out, but I do want to pull up one more before we move on and look at our buyer broker compensation agreement. We're gonna practice this together as a group. Today wasn't meant to do that, just to touch on some negotiating things with the purchase agreement. So our buyer broker compensation looks like this, where it very clearly spells out who's paying what. So if, and I put some examples here, if the seller's paying the amount that you're wanting, it says 3% from the seller, 0 from the buyer for that total of 3, if that's what you're charging. Here's another example. If the seller is only paying 2 and the buyer's paying 1, still says 3, just so that we have clarity around it. Questions about that? Or any of the other paperwork here? And like I said, we'll go into greater detail on that here in the up and coming weeks. I do want to spend some time on contingencies and the importance of timelines. So I review a lot of contracts of the agents in coaching and what they're writing offers on. I look at their loop and look at their paperwork, and I do see this a lot, and I'm not sure where it comes from. Redundancy. We don't need to put in general additional features to the contract or terms that it's contingent on financing or it's contingent on inspections. It already states that on the purchase agreement, so we don't need to say that again. But we want to make sure that you and your client understands what the contingencies are. So one, if they're getting a loan, the finances are contingent. That means if the house doesn't appraise unless otherwise noted, then there's a renegotiation going to happen. We recently had someone who had gotten an offer on their listing and didn't realize that their contract says from another brokerage already on there that if the house does not appraise, that the seller is not going to renegotiate the price and that the buyer needs to bring that deficiency. So as a listing agent, be very careful when other people come along and make offers, because that's going to be 90% of the time, and not reading their contract would be putting your client in a really serious situation. So like in her case, she didn't realize that her seller was agreeing that if the house didn't appraise, that they were absolutely going to have to renegotiate the price, or vice versa. Some buyers will say, I'm going to put an appraisal gap, and that means that they're going to absorb those costs. I'll give you an example. I sold a house last month to a buyer who closed last month, and because it was multiple offers and she was putting like $80,000 down, we went ahead and just put in an appraisal gap that stated if the house under appraises, she's putting enough money down to cover the deficiency, that we just have to pull some money from there to be able to cover it, and then she'll still move forward. Well, it under appraised $17,000. So that meant we couldn't ask the seller to bring their price down because we put that appraisal gap in the contract. So all she had to do was pull the 17 out of her down payment and then lower the amount that she's putting down to be able to cover the deficiency. So those are just some things that we will learn how to negotiate to keep the deal together as you're proceeding through the transaction. Other contingencies, of course, would be if they're doing a home inspection, and then learning how to talk to your buyers to be able to, again, bulletproof that transaction. I do a whole class called Bulletproof Your Transaction, which we will go over here in the summer sometime, because I'm seeing a lot of DFTs, which means deal fell through, because people don't know how to prepare their clients ahead of time. So it's super important to have the right expectation conversations prior to the inspections, so that way we can try to hold that deal together, unless something's wrong that's such a big deal that the buyer doesn't want to move forward. Those are times where we're like, you know what, this wasn't the house for you. However, I hate to see a deal fall through where everybody's losing out when it was something silly that we could have come to terms on. So we're going to learn a lot about that as we proceed through different scripts and stuff like that. There are deadlines on your contract. So I wrote down some different things to know here on deadlines. It's pretty typical that if you're writing an offer that the other agent wants a 24-hour return time. Keep this in mind when you're writing offers. If you put, I want to hear back in 5 hours, good for you, but the listing agent and the seller don't have to comply. They can say, yeah, we're not going to respond in 5 hours. then that you have a decision to make with your buyer. Are we actually voiding our contract in 5 hours? Or are we just trying to press them to give us an answer because we know they're having an open house later today? So be very well aware that communication is going to come up with you and the listing agent to get your ducks in a row. Typically 24 hours on an offer to be accepted. Also be aware, listing agents are putting in broker remarks that the offers are going to be being looked at, let's say, until 6 p.m. on Sunday. So be aware, so that way you don't have to keep changing your contract because you put the wrong timeline on there. It doesn't mean that the seller can't love an offer and accept one, though. So they can, but you got to be wording that properly. Sending all your documents to your lender and title company once the deal comes together is a very important thing to do ASAP. Right through your dot loop, you'll do that. Making sure that the buyer made loan application. So let me take a minute on this. Whether you represent the buyer or the seller, here in Ohio, you are allowed to contact the lender. You're not asking any personal information about the buyer if you represent the seller, other than things that could be your seller's detriment, which would be this. Did the buyer make loan application in the 5 days that's stated on the purchase agreement? Really important timeline thing. They are breaching the contract if they did not. As a listing agent, I'm allowed to know that. I'm not asking any other details of the lender. And if you're working with one of your preferred partners, they typically will give you, the listing agent, as well as the buyer's agent, an update on where we're at in the process. So that's a really important timeline because we have to get that ball rolling if we have, let's say, a 30-day closing. Scheduling your inspections in a timely manner. You're going to put an amount of days. Those inspections are not only to be complete. So hear me when I say, if your purchase agreement says home inspection within 10 days, it does not mean they have permission to have a home inspection on day 10. They can, but if that home inspector is not getting them back the report till the next day, you are out of inspection period. Here's what it means. It means that by midnight of day 10 of today being, let's say, day 1, because the contract came together today, the buyer has until midnight of that day to either pull out of the transaction because they don't want it because of the home inspection, or ask for repairs. If they do not do it by the end of that day, they no longer have that contingency. Super important to be real clear on your timelines there, especially with inspections. So basically tell your buyer, get those inspections scheduled immediately. Doesn't mean the other agent necessarily knows that. Let me say, even as a new person, this may sound a little bit snarky, but don't assume the other agent knows more than you just because they've been in the industry for a while. They may not. Maybe they never got proper training. Here at KW, it's all about training, and we make sure that everybody knows what they need to know. Not everybody knows those things. So open up that communication with the agent in case you're delayed on the inspections because they may not know. But you don't want to put your clients in harm's way for the agent to say, no, we're not going to repair that thing because you were past deadline. The ROC is your release of contingency. That's the document that you're going to use to either release the contingencies or to also ask for repairs and then the release. The closing date, recording date, and possession date could all be different dates. So let me explain. You could be signing, or your clients could be signing at 3 o'clock on Friday. But because, let's say, the county recorder's office is closed at 3:30 on Friday, that could mean that they're not going to record the deed until Monday. If Monday's a holiday, then it'll be Tuesday. Now, there are title companies, our in-house title company, American Title Solutions, they do what's called e-file. So if you sign at an afternoon date, they could still e-file, which means that it could record the same day. Or in particular, if both buyer and seller are signing in the morning, no issue, they're probably going to record in time. Here's my recommendation to you. Make sure your contract, when you do the close date, isn't a Friday. Then you never run the risk. Usually the holidays, depending on the holiday, isn't going to fall on Friday. Mondays is a more prominent day that there's holidays. Obviously, we have a lot of public holidays on Mondays. If I don't have to worry about Friday closing, then I don't have that whole long weekend. Someone might have to wait until the deed records. Here's why that's important for those of you who maybe don't know. you don't get the keys until the deed records, unless the seller has possession time after closing. And then you're not getting keys that day anyway, because you've given the seller some possession. So on the purchase agreement, it's going to say blank number of days of possession. It could be immediate possession, which means upon recording, or it could be 10 days after closing, which also means 10 days after the deed records. So be very clear on those dates. Nothing like your client showing up at the closing with the U-Haul truck thinking they were getting the keys. That's, again, those expectation conversations, which we talk a lot about when we're scripting. Questions about any of that? All right. Oh, here's one more thing. This keeps on happening too. We're getting a lot of complaints from sellers because buyers are bringing their entire family to the home inspection. If you don't have permission to do that, absolutely do not tell your clients, this is your chance to bring your whole family through. So we've had quite a few complaints on that recently. Contract negotiations. So here just gives you some things to know. I get ahead of myself always. We talked a lot about these things, about renegotiating different things in the transaction, such as repairs, price if we have to, if it does not appraise. In this packet in part 5, I go over step-by-step details of contract to close. What exactly do you as the agent need to know is going to happen step by step from the time you're under contract to closing? That's part 5. And then your assignment for this week is to create a loop, write up a mock offer on any property. I would pick just a random listed property and role play that with your partner. So find someone to partner with, and you're going to be role playing that as well. And then role play out the negotiating like they were a listing agent. So 1, create a loop, get all your documents in the loop, find someone to negotiate like as if you're the agent and they're the buyer, and then trade, and then and then that person should also be someone who will then act as the seller and how you would present that offer. No worries. Again, we do something called a multiple offer workshop quarterly. We just did one here in spring. So we'll probably do one again towards the end of summer where we go out and tour a house, walk through that. Were you there at that, Andy? No. Walk through the house like it's a buyer appointment, walk through the house like it's a seller appointment. And then day 2, we come back and then we practice writing offers and presenting them to sellers that second day. All right. Questions about contracts and negotiations that aren't specific to a particular contract or anything that we went over? Anybody in here? All right. If you didn't know, when you got into real estate, you opened a business. You didn't get hired. You're not a employee. You're a 1099 non-employee, actually, and you've opened a business. So you need to start from day 1 thinking about being a business owner. I like to use it's like you opened a restaurant. If I opened a restaurant, I did all this stuff to prepare. I hired people. I got my tables. I created the menu, blah, 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 for opening day to open the doors. And it's a business, right? So your real estate business should be run similarly. I have to learn some things to do. I need to prepare, get my tools ready. I mean, a roofer wouldn't go out to roof a house without a nail gun, right? So like you have to know what you're doing and get those tools together. And we're here obviously to help you along with that. But just structuring from the beginning like it's a business. And part of that is setting goals for yourself and also timelines. So am I full-time in real estate or am I part-time in real estate? Let me be clear on this. If you say that you're full-time in real estate, you could still have another job. Like I have a lot of dual career people in coaching that are also full-time in real estate. But what does that mean exactly? Here's what it means to me. If I'm full-time in real estate, that means I'm working 40 hours in real estate. If I'm part-time in real estate, that means I'm working 20 hours in real estate. Part of that time, and let's just say 40 hours, is being here. So for all of you who are here in person or on Zoom, this is part of your real estate day, right? So that counts. If I have 8 hours, I like to look at it as to spend. I have 8 coins I have to drop in the bucket today. What does each coin represent in my day? Then I need to decide what that looks like. Nothing worse to me than when agents say, I would work, I'm full-time. If I had an appointment, I'm available to show houses. Where do those people come from if you're not structuring your business like a business? If you don't market it, then they won't come, right? You won't have anyone to show houses to. So you have to learn to structure your day. And next week or the week after, in July's calendar, we're going to be doing our agent action plan, which is in the Locker Room University. For those of you who have access to that right now, I would recommend that you watch the modules for the agent action plan, and then we're going to put it all together here in a couple of weeks to get your plan going. And we're going to talk a lot about what your numbers are, how many hours you are going to invest in your work days, and then break that down to see, if I want to sell 12 houses, then I need to spend this many hours a week doing these different things, right? So we're going to break all that down. In the university, there's also a workbook you can download to be able to fill in those blanks when we meet in July to do that agent action plan. I like to say building your success schedule, and that success schedule looks like, first of all, picking a calendar that works for you. I would highly recommend everyone have some type of a calendar, whether that's some people like their actual print fold calendars or whatever. I use Google Calendar. Everything's on there. We just talked about time blocking on Tuesday, so it's super important to know that you control your calendar. I would say 90% of agents that I talk to tell me the reason why they're going into real estate or they got their real estate license is because they wanted a flexible schedule. But what does flexible mean? Flexible to me means that I can work from vacation, I can work at night, I can work in, the weekends, and I can also work during the week. Flexible means I'm stretching my work time to all time that I choose to work. It doesn't mean I don't work. So I feel like some people are misguided on what they think is flexible. Flexible just means I'm willing to pick my phone up on a Saturday and go show a house, and also on a Tuesday. So being aware, what are my hours? So deciding in your business, what are my hours? I think Erica was talking about this on Tuesday, right, Andy? What's my hours of operation? Decide that. And it can be flexible, right? And then put that in your calendar. These are my work hours every day. Is it going to be that I'm off on Wednesday because I work on Saturday? What does that look like for you? And then start filling in the time. And that's going to be spending time on different lead generating activities. The business doesn't just come. Even if you're buying internet leads or you're joining a team, all of those things still require you to do the job of a real estate agent and keep that business flowing, which we talk a lot about in nurture campaigns up in one of the other parts. I always put my personal stuff on my calendar first. So any reoccurring things I've got going on, I have kids and grandkids that do different sports. Like my granddaughter does rodeos and she also does competition cheer. All of her cheer stuff that travels all around the country is always on my calendar. I'm never missing that. I'm not going to miss a rodeo that she does on a Sunday. I'm not going to miss my son's football games when he played football. That all are non-negotiables for me. That's why I wanted to be an independent contractor, right? So that I can make those decisions. But it doesn't mean it's time off. I might have to double down on one of the days to make up the time that I'm taking off. So be aware of how we're going to move those things around. And we're going to do a lot of different trainings up and coming on time blocking and how to use your calendar and plugging your goals in there as well. Starting to plug in time for lead gen, plug in time for showings, open houses, or all the different sources of business that you're going to be working on. And then plan out how that's going to look. But more importantly, start tracking it. Here's why it's important to track what you're doing. I've created countless trackers that are all in our Google Drive training folder for you all to use. Some that you can print to have, because some people like to have paper. There's different spreadsheets you can use. There's examples of a ton of different trackers you can use. Here's why it's important to track. If I sell 10 houses this year, and next year I say, I want to sell 20. It's real simple math, guys. Go back to your trackers and times it by 2. If I made 10 calls a day and 3 posts a week, and I did 2 open houses a week, and now I want to double that so I can sell twice as many houses, you just double it. But you will not remember what you did if you're not tracking it. It's also really important to track because then you're going to start to see, where's my business coming from? Is it coming from open house? Is it coming from social media? Is it coming from my sphere of influence? Where's my business coming from? When you know that, then you can double down on that source too, if that makes sense. So also tracking things like how many calls a day I'm making, text messages, how many mailings I'm doing. One of the nurture your lead generation points, I think up in part 5 here, was the 5x5 approach, which goes into calling 5 people a day for 5 minutes, 5 times a week. Then texting them on day 2, then making sure you're friends with them on social media and causing social media engagement. There's a whole plan on how you can be doing that. If you're thinking, who the hell am I going to call? How am I going to come up with 10 people a day? Maybe it's 5 for you. Or if you're someone who likes to stretch it out for, I will call 20 people this week. Maybe that's what's going to be on your goal, however you're looking at doing that. Some of you guys just finished Bold, and that is one of those things that we're teaching in, in the KW world, and that's a lot of outreach. This past Bold was a lot of text messages and not just calls. So there's a lot of great scripting on how you can work that as well. So Taylor and I just worked on her GPS this morning. So definitely having your GPS, or some people call it a 135. GPS stands for goals, priorities, and strategies. So we're going to take those goals that you have and we're going to wrap them up with a nice big bow in what are your priorities and what are those actionable, measurable actions. Remember, that's what your strategies are. All of those strategies on your GPS are an item that you can measure and are actionable. And we're going to talk more about that here when we look at the SMART goals. So assignment for that section is to create your 90-day plan. Some of our agents are like, I just can't think ahead 90 days. I really want to do a 30-day plan. That's okay too. What am I going to do in the next 30 days if you need to chunk it down? Here's why we tend to say do a 90-day plan. Everything that I do today in real estate is going to bring me business and a closing, potentially a paycheck in 90 days. So every day you're spending in real estate, just know, if I decided not to do my best today and not work really hard, I'm not going to have a check in 90 days. So that's why we say do a 90-day plan. But if you need to do a 90-day plan and chunk it down to 30 at a time, by all means, I'm here not to mold you into a particular type of agent, but to mold the program into what it looks like for your particular goals. SMART goal stands for this. So your SMART goal is a specific, knowing exactly what you want to achieve. So you have to be specific about it. Measurable, how will you track your advancement? So how am I tracking what those goals are? And then they have to be attainable. I've had new people come in and say, I'm going to sell 50 houses this year. Okay, great. How are you going to do that? So we have to be realistic about it. Otherwise, some people were like, gosh, if I didn't do what I was hoping to do, I'm going to then do nothing. So be careful with that. And then relevant. So how is it going to broaden your objectives? So like, what is it exactly I'm going to do? And is it relevant to the market today? Is the best use of my time knocking on doors or doing open houses or calling for sale by owners, or just working the natural database I have of the sphere of influence that I'm working with? And then again, of course, time bound. So what is the deadline? Another thing that you can put on your GPS when you're looking at those strategies is a deadline. Remember when we said it should be something that you measure and it's an action item? It could also be measured by a deadline, such as I will do the whole thing on let's get started in real estate checklist, like getting my voicemail set up, getting my website set up, getting a professional photo taken by blank deadline. And then create another deadline for yourself after that of things. So now I'm just going to open it up to questions. So we're going to dive more into goal planning when we do that agent action plan series, which is coming up here in July. So anybody on Zoom or anybody here, what questions do we have? Thoughts that helped, didn't help? I'm going to stop recording and then let you guys take the can get to it here. Actually, I'm gonna stop share. All right,